start of it in old New York.
Of years, and this is our second book. Our first book was published back in 2014, very much focused on technology and the advances of technology and the amazing things that it could do for us. But it was very, very centered on technology. It didn't speak about much else beyond trying to make some predictions, and most of them have come true in one way, shape, or another. But we felt a number of years later down the road that the debate around technology and AI and blockchain, all those things, were done to some extent extensively, but weren't really focusing on the impact that was having on society, the individual, the ecosystem we live in, and therefore, how do we look at that? But more importantly, how do we also look at the patterns over the last few decades, in fact millennia almost, in some of the research that we were doing, and the patterns we see going forwards, and therefore is this something that actually is, I don't know, to use a term, mounting out of a molehill? We're all getting worried about nothing. The old story of yes, technology is coming in, but it just creates new jobs, which is what we heard for the previous industrial revolutions. Or in fact, have we got something that actually is completely new here, and therefore need to be addressed? And we address it in the book, and we'll come back to that in a few points in a minute. But the real desire for us in the book was to look at the impact of society, look at some of the early patterns we're seeing and how that manifested themselves in society. You look at the politics, for example, of the world, for example. And more importantly, the fact that we really wanted to encourage individuals to take ownership of their future rather than just letting it happen, which is why our tagline, I think your dog's just joined us.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Oh, it's great.
And that's why our tagline is really join the debate. So yes, our title is deliberately an innuendo, but it really refers to a physical phenomena of, technology is accelerated, but actually it will accelerate yet further, hence the word jerk, which is a physical terminology or a mathematical terminology. But we want people to join the debate. So that in very high level is why the book exists, and why Michael and I felt sufficiently passionate enough to spend, a couple of years doing the research and really arriving at a set of conclusions to put in place what we believe to be a readable book, but a book that enables people to not get alarmed necessarily, but start taking ownership for their own future and that of their children, their grandchildren, and employers for their employees, etc. So I guess that's context. Michael, do you want to dive down any of those just to get us going?
Yeah, I think that. So the last this century so far, we're 2 decades into this century, and I think there's been quite a lot of turmoil, really, a lot of change, a lot of exciting stuff that's going on, a lot of worrying stuff that's going on. At one level, you've got the rise of the technology companies. So there are 4 technology companies in the world today that are worth $5 trillion between them. And 20 odd years ago, Microsoft was worth quite a lot of money, but the others were nowhere really. Apple was struggling. Google hadn't even been founded, and Amazon was very small. It was an online bookshop, and that's all it was. So that's remarkable. But we've also seen a century that has seen inequality increase. We've seen polarization. We've seen opinions become quite extreme on both sides of the political divide. And we've also seen the smartphone as well. And I think the smartphone is an incredibly important product because it's kind of changed us, I think. And all these things have had quite a dramatic impact upon the world. But I think we would say that you've seen nothing yet, because the decade that's just beginning and the one that will follow will make the first 20 years of this century seem quite mild by comparison. Technology is going to change at a ferocious pace, at a pace that has never been witnessed before. And the social and economic consequences of that are both incredibly exciting, but also slightly terrifying as well.
Yeah.
What is the theory called when technology is growing at like such an exponential rate, and it's the last 20 years or so, it's been growing so much more. Like in 2000, we couldn't imagine what we have now.
Well, the book's called Living in Age of Jerk, and the jerk is a mathematical term, and it refers to when something is accelerating, and then its acceleration accelerates. So if you imagine a space rocket, and it takes off, and its acceleration is constantly getting quicker.
You can't even fathom it.
Yeah, you can't exactly, and that's what a jerk is, and we think that there have been intervals in history when there has been a jerk. It happened with the first industrial revolution, it happened with the second, it happened with the third industrial revolution, it happened with the Bronze Age, it happened with the Iron Age, it happened with the invention of writing, it happened with the invention of printing press. All these events in history sparked off a chain of events that led to massive change. Well, we think that over the next 20 years, there are going to be several things occurring, which each one of which is up there as one of the most significant sort of developments that have ever occurred. And AI, augmented reality, quantum computing, CRISPR-Cas9, the ability to edit our DNA, all these things are going to have a massively profound effect for which there is no precedent. So if you think the last 20 years has seen significant change, well, the next 20 years is going to be very significant, because technology is, in the terminology of the book, is jerking.
Many of these technologies are in their proof of concept. And what Michael is alluding to is that there will come a point where there'll be an inflection point where we move out of the proving of that concept. Like CRISPR-Cas9 we just mentioned to at this stage is still very much a trial process. No one's using it.
Could you talk about that for a second?
The CRISPR-Cas9 is a protein that enables you to edit a DNA. So you could technically remove disease or the precondition to a disease within a human being. Or you could do what the Chinese scientists did a few years ago and got themselves into deep water, try and tailor how a baby is born or what a baby looks like when it's born. So it's a momentous.
I heard of that one.
So it's a momentous piece of medicine without shadow of a doubt in terms of how we could correct disease or eradicate disease. But of course, you can imagine for every positive, there's potentially a negative in terms of the abuse of that technology going forwards. But it's still very much in trial. So you can't walk into a hospital and say, can I have this done or that done? A doctor cannot prescribe you to CRISPR-Cas9 type treatment. There will come a point when it will. There will come a point there will be adoption across the economy where you'll be able to use that technology to your advantage. And so there's that jerk moment where it suddenly goes into stratosphere almost. Because your whole world's adopting that technology, and that's when price points drop, and that's when the society benefits, but also society can be negatively impacted. But there's one constant in everything Michael described there, and that it is happening. Whether you like it or not, that technology innovation is happening, and it will transform the way in which we do business, the way in which we feed ourselves, the way in which we move from one point to another point, the way in which we are treated for disease, for example. And so society can address it the way it normally addresses it, which is, 1/3 of society decides that it's 1/3, sorry, the numbers are wrong, but then you end up with your early adopters that think this is great, very exciting, and move forward with it. And they tend to contribute to the proof of concept side because they're a very small number of people. And in complete contrast, you've got the other end, what we call the laggards, or more specifically, those people who are resisting the change because it's impacting them or it's changing their normal. And I think that's why we're starting to see some of those political extremisms come through as people realize that their way of life is being threatened, and therefore they need to try and protect it, whichever side of that spectrum they are. But the people we're trying to address really are the people in the middle, who are neither early adopters nor absolutely adamant they don't want to change their way of life. It's those who are much more apathetic about the fact that this change is happening, and therefore need to understand the significance of the change, as Michael's putting it, and start getting curious about how that change will affect their lives and their grandchildren's lives, etc.
Okay. I could give you a couple of very specific examples of that, and one of them is this thing here, which was. We've all got one.
It's brand new.
And I'm very proud of this. It's an iPhone 11 Pro Max or something, I think. So that's very exciting. It was launched in 2007. And smartphones went from being... I had a touchscreen smartphone before then. I think it was called an XDA, if I remember correctly. And it was a biggest heap of junk. It really was. It was terrible. I couldn't wait for the contract to end so I could get back to having an ordinary phone again. I couldn't use it. And what happened with this is that the technology was right. Before 2007, the technology wasn't there. You know, wireless internet access was rare. The processors weren't very quick. The components hadn't been fully commoditized. It was expensive. It was clunky. It was just not very good. But then the moment those conditions came into place, all of a sudden, whoosh, you know, the smartphone went from nowhere to becoming a product that's changed our lives, really. And Apple went from a company, you know, back in the late 1990s that was struggling for survival to a company worth $1.5 trillion in hardly any time at all, really. And it's all because I think there was almost like a tipping point. The technology wasn't quite there, wasn't quite good enough. It couldn't quite do it. So it was a bit disappointing. And then it could do it. And then, oh, this is interesting. And then each year it did it slightly better than the year before. And the takeoff was exponential. And another example we're seeing earlier stage of that is the electric car. So, you know, Julien was talking about the early adopters. Well, at the moment, it's your early adopters that are forking out $40,000 or $50,000 or whatever on a Tesla. But that's soon going to change. And I'm fairly sure by the end of this decade, most new cars will be electric.
Do you guys see anything like government's role in this? Could that potentially be an impediment?
So my opinion on that is that you can look at two ways. I think government has a role to play, but at the moment, I think government has been hijacked by individuals that are out for a short-term advantage to themselves rather than the long-term outcome of society. But I think the danger there is that we're placing too much, or the risk, sorry, we're placing too much emphasis on the government being the troubleshooter of the issues that the book is pointing at. And I think there is a much greater role for other stakeholder groups to play in this. I mean, one example we've talked about before, Michael and I, which is, if you look at the workforce and you look at the education requirements for that workforce to be ready for that new cycle of change that Michael was illustrating earlier on, at the moment, the entire emphasis is on the government getting its education program right, getting its education strategy right, whilst the employers complain around the fact that the workforce or the new arrivals to their workforce are inadequately educated to perform the new jobs. Surely corporates and employers need to play a much bigger role in terms of, making sure society or individual society are ready for that future. So yes, I think government can be in the way, but I think we've got to be careful we don't continuously as individuals, because we voted those people in, believe that the answer lies with them rather than with us.
Right. And like we said, the smartphone wasn't what it is now. Mm-hmm. How much more, aside from something like being put inside of you, and you could just think of something and you call on somebody, or something drops in front of your eyes or something. I don't know. It's because it's like we said earlier, it's exponential. Like you can't even fathom it. So is it something that you can envision?
I think that the smartphone is waiting for the next jump at the moment. So 2007 was a jump. It was, I don't like the word paradigm, but I suppose it fits. It was a paradigm jump in the phone world. We suddenly had these touchscreen mobile phones, and ever since then it's been evolution, incremental changes. I think there's going to be another paradigm jump. I think it's going to increasingly become wearable, and it will be merging with augmented reality. we'll probably wear glasses or contact lenses or whatever, and the screen will appear in front of us, projected. We'll see it through our glasses or our contact lenses, and to begin with, there'll be a virtual keyboard, and we'll type on it in thin air, and then it will be speech. It will be controlled by speech, and I suppose in due course, eventually, it would be a thought thing. But that's probably a couple of decades away yet. But I don't think it's not forever away, and I think it's in the lifetime of most people. It will happen within the lifetime of most people who are alive today.
A lot of people might be very wary of a future where it seems like it's inevitable.
Yeah.
Anyway, because it's just how we're building
and
things.
it's terrifying. But hasn't Elon Musk the slogan for his company? Is it Neuralink? His company? I think the slogan is something like, "If you can't join them, if you can't beat them, join them." And I think what he's trying to say is, look,
I think
it's scary.
I heard him on Joe Rogan. I think he said something like that. He was talking about it because it's you kind of got to create it in a way that's favorable for people or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think that's absolutely right. And someone like Gary Kasparov, famously got beaten by IBM computer. He was. I think Gary Kasparov is rated one of the best chess players of all time, and he got beaten by a computer in 1997. I think it was. Was it Deep Blue? Was it Deep Blue?
I lose to the computer in chess all the time, but I'm not very good. So
Right. I haven't played chess in years, and but Gary Kasparov has become a great fan of this idea that computer plus human is better. So we can't beat computers. It's happening. You can't stop automation. It's happening. Okay, it's going to happen. So how can we turn it to our advantage? I think
you said it earlier. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking there's going to be a certain percentage of society that's able to get their hands on it way before everybody else. It is going to be really expensive. It sounds like it's going to be really expensive at first.
It is, but it's always the case with technology, though. Technology always starts at a very high price point.
Sure. And
this is what we mean by that inflection point. The proof of concept means that early adopters, particularly affluent ones, will get access to that technology, will be able to use it, and that feedback will continue to improve it. But there will come a point where suddenly the price point, that volume goes up and the price point goes down as a result, the economy of scale. And therefore, other people will be able to use it. That's the intention, of course. But at this stage, some of these technologies are only certainly the advantage of those people who have the wealth to be able to access it, without doubt. The jerk effect, I guess, of technology and how that's really improving or could improve society is when it's at that point when a broader set of people can actually use it, access it, leverage it, evolve it yet further, etc. And so, some of these pieces that we're referring to now are technologies that are already in existence and just need to figure out how they become more widely used. Some of the pieces that Michael's referring to around Neuralink, for example, which is inevitable connection between the human brain and technology and getting thought to drive a particular technology outcome rather than a manual tapping on a screen, will happen. But we are some way away from that at this stage, but it will happen as well.
But then another step, of course, is when the AI anticipates what we want to do. So it might not necessarily read our thoughts, but it knows us extremely well. And certainly when it comes to things like watching TV, maybe we'll no longer say, "Oh, I feel like watching such and such a program." AI knows what the program we want to watch is. We are not sure that's a good thing, but I think that's an inevitable thing.
That's kind of like you have like the predictive text messaging.
Yeah, exactly. And it would just get more and more sophisticated, won't it? I mean, predictive text, it drives us all potty sometimes, but it is getting better. It is getting better. And it's the same with speech recognition. A few years ago, it was horrendous, wasn't it? I seem to recall there was a movie that came out a few years ago, and someone was a dog had a heart attack or something, and he spoke into his phone. How do you resuscitate a dog and it came back, there are 3 Starbucks in your area or something like that. It completely misunderstood the question. But that was just a few years ago. It's not like that now,
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not. And for somebody like me, who's kind of like, I don't have a sophisticated background like you guys do. You said join the debate.
Yeah.
What would that entail for probably me and most of my listeners?
Yeah, I think that what we want is for people to understand what's going on and become aware of the issues. And if people start discussing it socially with people at the pub or the restaurant or a cafe or whatever, saying, what do you think about this? Then that's the debate that I'd like to see. I'd like them to see people joining us on social media as well, of course. But that's the ultimate objective, for it to become, and it's going to happen. These issues are going to become more and more significant. Right now, how many people are around the world right now who haven't had a conversation about COVID over the last week? Exactly. These things, it's inevitable. It will happen. I think what we want to do is try and help encourage that debate to occur a little bit sooner, because our concern is that if you leave it too late, if you hang around, it'll be too late. Just as happened with COVID, I think. With COVID, a lot of countries. You're based in the US, I assume. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're in the US. I'm in the UK. We both had the same problem in both our countries, which we left it probably too late to deal with COVID, whereas a company like Germany got it, or Taiwan got it smack on, and the problem hasn't been so bad. The hit on the economy hasn't been so bad because it was left too late. And I think that's a very good analogy with the whole technology issue. Don't leave it too late before people wake up and understand how significant this is.
Yeah, I mean, it's ask the questions, really. It's engage, find out more, but ask the question. Don't believe everything you're hearing on TV. Don't believe everything you're reading in the newspapers. Ask the question for yourself and understand the answer, or understand there may be more than one answer, and then take the debate to the next level. We'd love people to start engaging with us via our various social media points that we have, from Facebook, Twitter, etc. Because we're very keen to continue creating momentum and growing the number of people who are asking those questions and influencing, ultimately influencing decisions down the road as to how these technologies are used and governed and brought to the advantage of society.
You mentioned that you guys had some predictions made in the past that were accurate.
Yeah.
And I wanted to share one of those, and then a prediction for the future. Dun dun dun. If you have any that you could go to.
Do you want to have a go at that?
Spot?
Sorry, I didn't.
No. The predictions. So in the
our prediction, book, or what somebody else has said, or
ours.
Oh, okay.
I don't care about anybody else. I'm talking to you guys.
No, okay. I think that during the course of this decade, we will see autonomous cars. I think it will be a little bit similar with smartphones. At the moment,
are you familiar with Andrew Yang?
No, sorry.
He ran for president, and he was talking about universal basic income.
Oh yeah, Yang. Sorry, yes, yeah. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Did you say Andrew Yang?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Andrew Yang. I think he's great. I was very sorry that he pulled out of the election as soon as he did. I was hoping.
His book, The War on Normal People, was one of the first things that I read that because I heard him on Joe Rogan, and then I listened to his book, and that's kind of been making me want to be more in tune with.
Yeah.
You shouldn't need an excuse to be more in tune with what the future is, but sometimes
you need a trigger. No, but you need a trigger. So that book was a trigger for you.
Yeah, but I think autonomous cars at the moment, it's going to reach that point when one day they're not quite as safe as cars driven by people, and then the next day they will be slightly safer. And the moment they're slightly safer, you'll see them emerge very, very rapidly. Because if it can be shown that autonomous cars are safer than cars driven by people, why would you drive it would start with parents. They're saying they want their kids to, well, I don't want my kids to drive one of these cars. I want them to have an autonomous car because I'm really worried about them. The insurance companies will step in and say, well, we'd much rather people have an autonomous car because they're safer and the insurance premiums will be much lower and so on. And I think that transformation will be very, very rapid. All of a sudden people say, well, they're safer, so we'll have them. And I think it will happen over a very short period of time. And so I think that's something that will happen during the course of this decade, later in the decade, I think. Yeah. But I think that will happen, and that will have a massively disruptive impact upon the economy, because we will stop buying cars, we'll start sharing them, we'll order them, we'll Uber them, but we won't have to pay for a driver, so it'd be much, much, much cheaper than it is at the moment. That'll have a massive impact on the global economy, really. The whole car industry will be hit very, very hard by that. So that's one thing that will happen this decade. Something else that I think is quite close is real-time language audio, spoken language translation, so that you'll be able to have a conversation with anyone in the world, whatever language they speak, providing that they've got the same app as you've got and they've got their headphones plugged in, which I think is incredibly profound technology. So I mean, they're two things that I think will happen.
Soon. You're saying like within a decade.
Sorry. Well, listen,
yeah, absolutely. I don't think that technology is far off at all.
Go back 20 years, and the CEO of Cisco, large American company, was predicting that voice would be free. Everyone thought he was absolutely out of his tree with that prediction. But look at us now. We're all on WhatsApp, FaceTime, whatever. When was the last time you paid for a phone call? You're not.
Can't think
it's
of
virtually free. Virtually free. So if I were to be as bold as the Cisco CEO and say in 20 years' time, Michael, I reckon energy will be free.
I think that's a reasonable prediction. Yeah. I mean, we're already approaching a point when the marginal cost of energy at certain times is approaching zero. If it's very sunny or very windy, then the renewables could generate way more energy than we can use. And on those occasions,
do you think it'll happen through like a solar power medium or?
Yeah, renewable energy generally, yes. Renewable energy sources will be the driver of that.
Well, correct? I think, it's falling in cost. It has been falling in cost. In 2014, when Julien and I worked on iDisrupted, it had been falling in cost, and people said, "Oh, yeah, but that's going to stop soon. That's a one-off. That fall in cost is about to come to an end." Well, that was 6 years ago. The cost of renewables. The cost of energy generated from renewables. So in 2014, we noticed that it had fallen quite significantly, and cynics were saying things like, "Oh yeah, but that's not going to be the case so much longer. We've hit the end of the road there." Well, that was 6 years ago, and in fact, the pace with which the costs of energy generated from renewables has fallen at an even faster rate. It hasn't slowed, it's accelerated. It's not jerked necessarily, but it's certainly accelerated. And I think that trend will continue. In some parts of the world, renewables is by far and away the cheapest way of generating energy. The problem you've got with it, of course, is that solar's not much good when it's not sunny and the wind's not much good when it's not windy, but there are solutions to that. There are solutions to those, and one of them is energy storage, of course. Mm-hmm. But one of the solutions is by making intelligent use of the energy, which is where AI and the Internet of Things and 5G comes into the story, because all of a sudden it can say, right now, energy is plentiful. It's windy, it's sunny, energy's cheap. Let's turn on all the applications that are energy intensive. Let's charge up the electric cars. Let's heat up the storage heaters. Let's get the water desalination plants working. And then if when the wind dies down and when it's no longer so sunny, then we say, well, we won't worry about that. We'll just worry about the things people have got to have. So that's one example of how the energy industry could be transformed. And we're already very close to having zero marginal cost of energy at certain times of the day.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. And that's is that what Tesla, didn't he have a way to provide electricity for free?
Yeah. Well, Tesla, I mean, they're
I mean,
investing
it's probably
so
it's way different than the modern solutions. But
well. Tesla are investing so heavily in their lithium-ion batteries. You know, they're becoming really, really good at them now. And there's talk about them developing a battery with a Chinese company that will have a longevity of 1 million miles, which is just, you know, amazing, really.
yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
I was
it's a
looking at
lifetime.
those.
It doesn't mean it still have to get recharged regularly, but it would, you know, at the moment with our smartphones, 2 or 3 years down the line, then we've got to get a new smartphone because the battery's packed up. Well, with this battery that Tesla's working on, it could have a lifetime of 20 years, and the implications of that are incredibly profound because suddenly the cost of storing energy becomes very, very cheap.
Which it can be, because you know, we're seeing super materials coming in as viable technologies for them, the actual conduct of technology from one point of generation to a point of consumption. At the moment, one of the greatest issues of moving energy is the loss of energy as it moves from one point to another. But there are super materials out there like graphene and others that actually make the whole notion of moving energy from point A to point B with no loss a highly likely outcome. And so, as you can see, the usage of energy dropping through Michael's example of, for example, not owning our cars. I mean, at the moment, most people will look at it going, well, okay, so everybody will own a Tesla. No, that's not the way the model's going to go. Everybody will be using a Tesla when they need to use a Tesla. So therefore, there'll be probably fewer Teslas out there, and therefore we'll be consuming less energy moving ourselves around. So if you've got loss of energy dropping because we're being more efficient, you've got usage of consumption of energy being more effective or more sort of efficient, then that should start balancing out in terms of the amount of energy we're needing to produce and the cost of that energy. And therefore, I don't think the prediction of energy being free as voice is free now in 20 years' time, that far-fetched.
No, I agree with that. I think that's true. Yeah. And there's one other point. You talked earlier about the cost of the technology and will it be accessible to the mass market. I think there's more of an educational problem than a price problem, because, you know, this thing here, you know, how many of these are there out there? 1 billion? This technology is extraordinarily sophisticated. It's incredibly powerful. You know, someone said, "Oh, is there more power in an iPhone than the whole of NASA had during the moon landings?" And the answer to that is yes, many, many, many times over. Mm-hmm. You know, this technology, an economist called Brad DeLong worked out that if someone had tried to build a computer with the power of an iPhone 10 in 1957 using state-of-the-art technology at that time, it would have cost $150 trillion, and you would have needed a building about 50 stories high with a square footage the size of the city of London or something. You know, it would have been phenomenal. And all of a sudden,
Imagine the energy cost just to power that computer, the 50 stories
it was
high.
more energy than the world capacity to produce energy at that time.
Yeah.
So you can forward project that 10 or 20 years, and the implications are extraordinary, actually, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if you're thinking about the amount of energy you need to power this thing, oh, you can't see it, my iPhone.
It's nicely camouflaged.
That's technology.
Black phone against a black background. Very cool.
That's right. Doesn't quite work. But anyway, it's a standard iPhone, and the amount of energy in that, you know, make it last an entire day powering that amount of processing power goes to show just how efficient we can get in terms of there are energy requirements to end up with the same output.
Okay. I'll give you a very geeky example. So if you imagine technology changing exponentially, and it doubles in power every year or every 18 months or whatever. So Moore's law describes how computers supposedly double in speed every 18 months. There's a possibility that that's actually sort of come to an end now. But with quantum computers, you could see something even faster than that. Computed processing power could theoretically double every 9 months or something like that. Now I want you to imagine that. So if you imagine a chessboard and you put a grain of rice on that chessboard, and then on the next board is a metaphorical chessboard, not a real chessboard, because there's no chessboard big enough for the example I'm about to give you. And you put 2 grains of rice on the second square, 4 on the third, 8, 16, 32. If you carried on doing that to the end of that chessboard, and then you grabbed another and a third and a fourth and a fifth chessboard, do you know how big a container you would require to contain all the grains of rice by the middle of the 5th chessboard? Any ideas?
I have no idea.
Okay, I'll tell you. You would need a container the size of the universe. Okay, and that's the power of exponential. That's what happens when numbers double. And
yeah, that's what's crazy about the
stuff. It is crazy. It is completely crazy now, and we saw exponential with COVID, and but it's, you know, thankfully it stopped. The exponential rate stopped, but for a while it was doubling every few days, every 5 or 6 days, and that was terrifying. I think it was terrifying.
Saying it's gonna keep doubling, but never stop doubling.
Well, it stopped doubling because
not COVID. I'm saying not COVID.
Oh well, it will stop eventually, but I think that time is a long way off, and the potential, not for traditional computers, but for quantum computers, the potential is phenomenal.
Oh, yeah. That's the thing about technology. You end up with one particular technology reaching its peak, and it gets replaced by another. So current computers are, you know, silicon based and ran by, you know, ever decreasing in size transistors on silicon boards. But the industry that is a chip industry is realizing the maximum it can get out of a silicon board. But quantum computers is the new technology coming through, which will completely overcome any limitations that the silicon chip industry is currently facing, which is a fascinating in itself, because if quantum computers do reach, or when they reach the potential that they have, you theoretically end up with blockchain no longer being secure.
Okay. Yeah, and blockchain is a whole nother, you mentioned that it's a start, but
yeah. So blockchain is a whole different technology, but the blockchain itself, the distributed ledger concept, we can talk about separately. But one of the fundamental pieces that protects blockchain is the amount of computing power you would require to actually unravel
the algorithm.
The algorithm that protects it is so expensive that it's not worth unraveling the algorithm of that blockchain. But quantum computers suddenly raises a whole different question, which is actually that the computational power of a quantum computer is such that it actually is going to cost you a fraction of that original cost using silicon computers to crack that blockchain. And so technically, obviously blockchain will evolve in itself, but technically blockchain as we know it now is no longer a secure ledger when quantum computers really reach their commercial capacity, let's say.
But there are positive applications to quantum computers as well.
Of course.
For those that don't know, because people might hear blockchain and not know what that means.
Okay, do you want to do that one or me?
No, go for it, Michael. No, over to you.
Thank you for that.
I can do it if you want.
The idea of blockchain is that it's a ledger. It's a form of storing information, but the information is stored on every computer in the network.
And this is Bitcoin.
Well,
so Bitcoin is built on
is a form of distributed. Is a form of blockchain.
Correct.
The slight problem we have with Bitcoin is that it's become associated with hype. And as a consequence, a lot of people don't like the word blockchain because they associate it with Bitcoin, and people have started talking about distributed ledger now instead, or DLT, distributed ledger technology. So if you hear the phrase DLT technology, it's basically the technology that Bitcoin is built on. So every computer in the system,
blockchain's different, right? Okay, I see what you're saying.
Okay,
so types of blockchains. Bitcoin's one type of.
Yes, it doesn't have to block. So Bitcoin is a currency, but it could be multiple different things. Like there's one company, I was the editor of the technology magazine last year, and I interviewed a company who'd come up with a form of blockchain for keeping a record of disposable bottles, so that every time a bottle goes into a recycling bin, it keeps a log of how that bottle is no longer owned by such and such a person. It's now been recycled, and then that person would be entitled to a refund, only a couple of cents. But
it's a digital record of
it's a digital
transactions.
Record. Exactly.
Right. Yeah,
exactly.
It's a digital form of record of transactions. Correct.
It could also be used for share dealing as well.
But the difference is, from the current structure you see, is that if you're share trading, as Michael put it, that goes through a central repository that actually, so all transaction goes through a central system.
Okay.
A DLT, or a digital ledger technology, is actually not central. You can actually have your very own system. So you're no longer at the beck and call of one organization running that ledger. It sits by itself independently and cannot be altered. So if a transaction is recorded on a blockchain, you cannot alter it. You can only add to it. You can't subtract from it. And so it's pretty bomb-proof in relation to recording in a secure way a particular transaction. So you can see the application to anything from accounting to share trading to even the pharmaceutical industry is looking at now in terms of how do you eliminate counterfeit drug, because a lot of counterfeit drugs are illegal and actually dangerous. So Bitcoin uses that because, of course, it's a marvelous way of recording a particular digital currency called the Bitcoin. And then not being able to alter it. So if that transaction says you have earned 2 Bitcoins, you can't change that ledger because it's sitting on blockchain.
Okay. And online voting is another potential.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, and then quite topical, I think, in view of some of the conversations going on in the US around postal voting and and various pieces of so-called abuse in certain other countries. And certainly blockchain lends itself very nicely to that as a technology of how do you enable a secure way of voting using that technology. The challenge, of course, is not all of us, as we said in the beginning, is yet open-minded to vote in that way. A lot of people still like the piece of paper and the big red cross.
But Julien is speaking to you from Switzerland, and of course in Switzerland they have referendums, they have votes every 5 minutes, don't they? In Switzerland.
It's not as frequent as that, but we certainly, as a country, the country likes to use referendums and therefore likes to consult the society at large, those who are allowed to vote, to opine on a particular change of policy or introducing a new policy. So it's a very different model to the model in the UK or the model in the US, certainly. So blockchain should...
Is that direct democracy?
It's a referendum model whereby voters are asked to opine more often on decisions. You could argue both ways. You get the argument that says that actually having gone through the pain of electing a politician to represent me, be it the governor or the senator, or in the UK, the members of parliament, then you should rely on that individual to make decisions on your behalf. The Swiss system is very different. They have a more federated system whereby the individual in the street who has the vote is often asked to opine on something that relates to decisions that would affect them. The UK had a go at referendums fairly recently, and they created an absolute mess as a result. So,
some people would say it worked out very well. It depends on which way you voted, really, I suppose. But it does make me think of, actually, there's quite an interesting analogy here with ancient Greece in Athens, when they had, the purest form of democracy, I believe, providing you were a free male, that is. It wasn't much good, wasn't much use if you were a woman or if you were a slave, of course, but we have to bear in mind this is 2,500 years ago, and attitudes were slightly different then. But for a free male, you had the purest form of democracy, in which the people in Athens, they used to meet in the square on the hill, I think it was, in Athens, and they voted on absolutely everything. And the leaders weren't voted for. The people who were charged with the responsibility of putting into what the people wanted into practice were chosen by lot. The only people they voted for were generals. Now, it kind of worked in Athens because you're talking about a relatively small population. It would hardly work for something nationally, but online voting does bring in an interesting dimension of that, and certainly you could see something maybe at a local level, possibly.
And it'll be harder to the blockchain will prevent the fraud.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So, you got to remember that every individual needs to be comfortable using technology to vote. That's
that too. That's that old guard that you guys mentioned earlier.
Correct. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm checking ahead you guys for a half hour. Is it okay that we went over time and everything?
Yeah, of course. More than happy to share our point of view and answer your questions. I'm just conscious of the fact that we're due, Michael and I, you and I are due on a call in 10 minutes and another call. So we should probably look to wind this discussion up in 10 minutes.
Okay, great. And so we got full 10 minutes then.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Is the
remind
book,
you of the book, by the way?
Yes, I wanted to bring up the book. I think now's a good time to bring up the book.
Cool.
How many of these topics have we covered that you talk about in the book?
I think we've covered all of these topics.
Pretty much all of them, apart from some of the forecasts or predictions you're asking for us. I don't think we put those predictions in the book,
we have got some forecasts at the back of the book. Actually, we have got a list of predictions at the back.
True, yes. These are going to make some people are going to make some.
Tell you what some of them are if you're interested.
Yes, we did have a go at some predictions. So we looked at technology innovation over the last few decades, or centuries, sorry. And so we had a go at trying to look forward as well in terms of decades. But every other theme we discussed with you this afternoon in this call this morning for your audience are in the book, and we debate them at some length. So it should be fairly simple for people to understand where we're coming from and where we're going with our debate.
When does the book come out?
It's out. So it was launched on the 14th of July, correct. And so we're literally about to add all the links for Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and a few other stores that are now selling the books, best way to describe it. And the next few hours, those links should be on our website. But if you go to Amazon.com and Google "Living with the Age of the Jerk," it'll pop up.
Do you have an Audible version?
Not yet. We're working on that. So at the moment, you can get the Kindle version and you can get the softback that Michael's got in his paws.
Okay, you guys have great voices for the American audience. I'm sure we'd love to hear you dictate the Audible version.
We'll make a note of that in relation to the audio version. Then, although at this stage, I'm not sure I want to reread the book again.
So we've got so you mentioned forecasts, and I've just pick one at random here, and it is genuinely at random. It's the first one I've spotted. 2032, the fake news battle reaches new heights as augmented reality products whisper into our ear, advising us if information we have just heard or read may in fact be fake or misleading. Although the intention behind this is well-meaning, there will be a massive public backlash and claims of state-sponsored indoctrination. Some press, which will fall victim to the fake news apps, will be among the more vociferous critics. There you go. So that's one of the predictions. 2032.
So what you're saying is that there'll be something that'll be able to dictate whether something we just saw in the news is fake or not?
Yeah, it'll say to us, that's not true. So someone will make some claim.
It sucks that we have to have that.
Now, I agree, but
yeah, well, but of course it becomes
we have to have
debatable, and then some people will start. I don't know what it's like in the US, but in the UK there are fact-checking websites out there. Some of the people who are particularly, shall we say, free and easy with the truth, are very critical of these fact-checking websites, and they say, "Oh no, that's not the facts at all," And it reminds me of George Orwell's 1984. I don't know if you've read Orwell's 84. And one of the things in there was, although I think I see Orwell as mainly being about
the truth has always been the truth. Once you say it, once the state puts it in your face.
Yeah, exactly. So Orwell was primarily about privacy and that Big Brother watching us, but it was also about the idea that the state could convince us something was true even though it wasn't true. And I think he said
that would always be like it's like that was always the truth, and it's like
yes, exactly.
Okay.
So I seem to recall there was a story when the was it Oceania? I can't remember the names of the states in Orwell's 84.
Yeah.
But there was a news story, and they had suddenly they were at war with a different region of the world, and it had just changed. And he thought, but we were at war with somebody else yesterday. But the news was presented it like we've always been at war with this region of the world.
Yeah.
And by the end of the book, he'd accepted that because he'd been completely indoctrinated. By the end of the book, it had changed.
Big Brother.
Well, Big Brother says that's who we've always been at war with, and that's who we've always.
But the winner always writes history, though. And we know that.
Indeed,
the winner always writes history.
Churchill that said that.
I always remember my grandmother talking very positively about the fact that the British won the Second World War, and that they'd won it because they invented the radar, and that we were the best at the radar, etc. It's taken a few years later for British history books, certainly, or try to say history books generally, to acknowledge the fact that the Germans actually were way ahead of the British in terms of radar technology throughout.
The Germans were ahead of everybody, it seems.
Yeah. The technical innovation coming out of Germany in the Second World War was significant, and so way ahead on a number of fronts.
Yeah, it's actually the Second World War is quite interesting. I was watching a documentary about that recently, and it seems to me that the ultimate fortunes of World War II were determined by who made the least amount of mistakes, because
correct.
I think that was what actually determined.
No, absolutely. But I mean, the big thing that knocked silly mistakes were one, or certainly ridiculous mistakes were one, and most of them, Hitler driven because he was a bit of an egomaniac. The others could just run out of people.
Yeah.
That's right.
At D-Day, the intelligence didn't reach Hitler in time to respond to the Allied invasion because they were frightened of waking him up. And that helped determine the course of the war, which is just absolutely crazy.
That's insane.
Yeah.
That's why you got to be a little bit of a morning person, so people
absolutely
look forward to seeing you wake up.
Or less of an egomaniac,
Or less of an egomaniac.
Yeah. Well, I've become a morning person because I've got children and they force me to get up early. Or their kids are grown up now, but certainly I do see technology, AI can help us grapple with fake news. It can actually sort of whisper into us and say, that's not true. There are dangers in that, though. There are dangers in that.
I don't understand, because if the information is just coming from like publications, how would it be able to determine if something is true or not?
Well,
technology.
I mean, it would cross-referencing, because there will be fact-checking websites out there, which we could all. I always think it's one of the great. It's not a mystery because we know the reason for it, and the reason is that people are lazy. But it's strange that we've got this greatest library that ever existed sitting in our pocket, and yet we have fake news.
You know what I just thought recently, because I was on Facebook, like the primary medium for educating others or ourselves is like sharing a meme.
Yeah,
it has like 6 words on it, and it's like it's as simple as this.
Yes, exactly, and that's so sad when we've got all this.
I do it too.
We all do. Yeah, we all do. I mean,
but that's like people will look at a meme and then say, "Oh, did you hear about this?"
That's how it spreads. But we talk about that. We talk about that as the echo chamber, don't we? The group think the echo chamber, where you continue to see the stuff you want to see, and therefore they continue to reinforce what you think.
If I read or hear something I strongly disagree with, and someone states something as a fact, and that's not what I think, then I go and fact check it, and then I'll discover that they're wrong, and then I'll think, oh, what idiots, they should have fact checked it. But if I was to hear someone state something that I already agree with, then I don't fact check it, and maybe that's also false. So maybe what AI can do is whether it's something we agree with or disagree with, it could actually turn around and say, yeah, exactly.
No,
exactly.
It's not too far. But it's not too far-fetched, having Alexa or Siri or whatever respond to a question. And you need some sort of algorithm in the background that goes to certain proven sources of information and come back to you with, out of the 10 sites I've checked, 7 collaborate the information you've been asked about, and therefore, leave it to you to decide whether it's fake news or not. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Right, get it to a certain too.
But there is scope, of course, for it to be abused, and that's
of course there is. Yeah. As we know from the alleged interference from certain states within other states, you can drive debate.
Will have their own fact checkers.
Well, you've seen presumably the great film on Netflix, The Great Hack. Is that what it's called? The one about Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah.
About Cambridge Analytica
Cambridge Analytica
specifically.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen that, you should absolutely see it, because it's wonderful to watch how human behavior can be influenced and how you use that data to influence that human behavior. And so,
Great hack. I haven't seen it. I'll have to watch it.
It's about Cambridge Analytica and how that was used to influence the UK, to some extent the US, but those are still somewhat, the jury is a bit out as to whether they actually influence or not. But there are some 2 or 3 case studies within the Great Hack that talk about how Cambridge Analytica influenced election outcome in a few other countries around the world. Incredibly clever stuff. And how you manipulate human behavior and therefore final decisions using the data.
There's these stories that come out. Russian bots is something to hear over here. That they'll take a 5-second clip of a video, put a little caption with it, and it's completely different than what the whole context of the video was about. Yep. It just influences people, and then they start sharing it, and then it's.
Well, the other thing you've got is deep fakes. I don't know if you're familiar with deep fakes. I think the famous one is of Obama, and it's not Obama, or it is Obama, but they've manipulated him saying something else, which is so you're hearing somewhat exactly.
If it gets really good, it's really dangerous.
Yeah, it's very dangerous. Yeah. So in the book we look at 8 different sort of scenarios, 8 different ways we think technology could affect the world. Some of them are quite positive. We sort of call them sort of utopian type scenarios, and we look at others that are more dystopian. And certainly one of the scenarios we look at is a sort of Orwellian 1984 type scenario in which things go as described by George Orwell, really. And we also look at a scenario which we liken to Star Wars, in which you have extreme inequality and despotic leaders that like the Sith in Star Wars, totalitarian governments, fascists or whatever, as being another potential sort of outcome. So we look at lots of these dystopian.
Michael's doing his Obi-Wan Kenobi look now.
Yes, indeed.
For those familiar with Star Wars.
Yeah.
If people want to follow you guys, keep up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If people want to follow us,
social media.
Yes, so we've actually been quite cheeky. We've decided to call social media access Techopia. So we're trying to merge utopia and dystopia into the influence of technology. So it's called Techopia. So we recommend you either go to our website on www.techopia.co, or if you go to Twitter or you go to LinkedIn, for those who use LinkedIn from a business perspective, or Facebook, just check out Techopia, one word, TECHOPIA, and join us. Just tell us whether you agree or disagree. I mean, we don't care either way. We'd rather you tell us if you disagree than tell us why you disagree, because Michael and I are always very interested in understanding other people's perspectives, and we recognize that our lens is one way of looking at life.
Beautiful. Techtopia. I'll get up with it, and I'll make sure I get a copy of the book.
Cool.
That's great. Brilliant. Just to remind you.
Living in the age of the jerk.
Living in the age of the jerk.
Should be pretty easy to remember.
Yeah.
Yes.
Technology, innovation, pandemics, and our future. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Tony. It's been an absolute pleasure to share with you our passion, I guess, and what's motivated us to write this book and to share it. And then we really hope people buy it, of course, but more importantly, engage and tell us what they think.
Absolutely. No, it was a pleasure was all mine. I feel like I learned a lot in the past hour alone.
Cool.
I'm sure I'll be wrapping these ideas around my head for some of the foreseeable future too. So thanks a lot, and I hope the listeners did as well.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
So too. Thank you for the opportunity.
Gentlemen.
Bye.
Cheers, bye.
Yes, sir.
Bye.